let's get started here. So we're going to talk here about the authenticity paradox for both women and men leaders because it is relevant for both. It has a different implication though for women and women's well-being than it does for men, and we're going to get into that as well. So a little bit about me. I am a professor of leadership and organizational behavior here at IMD. I have been here for it will be 8 years in June, so just about 8 years. I'm a psychologist by training, so I look at this topic very much from the psychological angle. What is happening between our two ears? What is happening in our head? And what is happening in our hearts when it comes to leadership and how our environment around us affects us as leaders as well. Now, as you may have noticed, I can't hear you. It's a format where I can't hear your voice, but what I can do is see the chat. So I have the chat here. I'm actually going to even bring it up on the screen. So I see it up there. So if you want to ask me a question, please write in the chat. I have not set aside question time for the end. So if you would like to ask a question, please ask it whenever and don't wait till the end because there's not time at the end, okay? So what you will leave this session with, it's a relatively short session, right? It's 1 hour. It's going to be fairly participative as well. So it's going to be leadership and not leader sleep. You're going to have to be involved, but you'll leave the session with an understanding of the relationship between the authentic self and perceptions of leadership. Like we talk about the authentic self as such a positive thing. I can't name the number of clients that come to us at IMD saying, help our leaders to be more authentic. And I'm like, well, if you really want their authentic selves, why are you sending them to IMD so that we can have impact on how they behave? Like, just let them be. So I'm actually not a full fan of this idea of fully being our authentic selves. That said, I'm not sure about how many of us in the here and now at this point in our lives, so I'm in my 40s, I'm guessing some of you are somewhere around there. How many of us really think our authentic selves are our our authentic selves? Meaning, like, how much is the person you think is the authentic you really the authentic you, or is it the person that at this point in your career you think that people want you to be, or you've been shaped or molded to be? So I do see a lot of clients, or the main reason people bring their participants, their leaders to us here at IMD is to shape them in some way, to change the way that they lead. And I don't know if always that is necessarily trying to change their authentic self, or is it trying to get them back to their authentic self that they were before they were told who they should be or how they should act, which maybe is true and maybe is not. So I have my issues with this whole idea of the authentic self, which I will share with you, okay? We'll talk about the cost of being emotionally inauthentic. So I think there is kind of our behavioral authenticity, but there's also kind of our emotional authenticity in terms of allowing ourselves to experience the emotions that are coming up for us. And then the different relationships that men and women have with emotional authenticity. I'm going to reveal some information at the beginning. Both women and men struggle with this idea of being emotionally authentic at work or maybe in life. But we have different reactions to that inauthenticity. And then how to be your emotionally authentic self in a way that is accepted by others. Because, we say, okay, we should be more authentic, but if you want to scream and be very, very aggressive because that's authentically the emotion that is coming up for you, it's probably not appropriate to scream or to yell at somebody or even, physically be aggressive if that is coming up. So you can't always be your emotionally authentic self, maybe in the way you first imagined being. So how do you manage that? Because in the workplace or even in life in general, right? For those of us who are parents, right, we know that sometimes we might be so tired, we might really have our ability to self monitor being challenged, right? Like the ability to suppress that anger being challenging, yet we know we need to do it. And so there is a value of being inauthentic at that moment, but it's not always easy and it sometimes takes a toll on us. So I'll talk about that toll and how it differs for women and for men. Does that sound good for you, or any other topics that are related that you would love me to touch? Let me know in the panel. All right, let's go for it. So, okay, so let's start with the authentic self, right? Again, we hear so much about people should be their authentic selves. Um, there is some value in that, unquestionably. First of all, what is the authentic self? I like that. I like this definition. So an idealized state of self-actualization, like you truly have become the person that you are meant to be. And then self-congruent behavior, where behavior is aligned with your personal values. That's the definition of authenticity that I like. And it's a really nice idea. And we see all the benefits of it. So people that say, and by the way, all the studies on authenticity are always self-report. People report if they feel authentic. There's no way to really judge is someone being their authentic self. All studies on authenticity measure authenticity in one way, asking people, how authentic do you feel? Which that in itself, by the way, has a lot of problems with it, because someone might say they feel authentic, but they don't really know what that authentic self is. Or someone may say, oh, I feel really inauthentic, but they wouldn't be able to tell you when they are being authentic either. So that in itself is a problem. So just know all the research that says authenticity is great, it is all based on this premise that either you are able to judge when you're feeling authentic, or some studies ask people to judge how authentic you seem, which, by the way, seeming authentic is very different than being authentic. Okay. So people who report being more authentic are less likely to accept external influence on their viewpoint. So they're more likely to stay, um, to have integrity with how they actually believe. They experience more positive emotions. So they say that they feel more joy, that they feel more happiness in everyday life. And they report experiencing more mindfulness and presence. So clearly, there's all these benefits of being that or feeling that authentic self. Okay. And at the same time, we know that in organizational cultures, right, there might be that 100% natural self, if it even exists. And then there's that kind of chameleon. Like, how many of you, and I'm going to ask you this in just a second, how many of you feel like you have been asked or you have to be successful in your environment, sort of adapt to that culture or that context that you're in? Either that could be national cultures, right? If you are, I saw a few Dutch people, right? So let's say, like, I have Martijn, right, who's working in New Jersey. Americans, as an American myself, I can say, like the Dutch, we're very low context. We say things straightforward until it comes to negative feedback. And then Americans don't really like direct feedback. So I'm going to guess, Martijn, that maybe you've had to adapt a little bit of how you would give negative feedback from where you would do it in the Netherlands to how you would do it in the US. So it might be cultural, but it might be, like national culture, but it might be organizational culture as well, right? Maybe you are somebody who is extremely flat in the way you like to deal with hierarchy, and you're working in a hierarchical organization. You have to be very respectful of that hierarchy. So maybe Martijn says so true. I know, because I worked in the Netherlands and I also had to adapt how I gave feedback to be a bit more direct. So maybe it's about, like, okay, this is how I naturally would do it, but to be successful here, I need to be a bit more respectful of the hierarchy. So, we talk about all this stuff, like we should be authentic, and yet we know that as leaders, we also need to be sensitive to the context and the people around us. So how do we balance this? And so I'm going to ask you, and I'm asking you to do it in a very black and white way, but please do it. Which one are you? Would you say as a leader, you're more of the 100% natural, kind of true to selfer? Or would you say you're more of the chameleon, more of the adapter? And I'm going to ask you to go, you're going to go to Mentimeter. So it's either menti.com and use this code 2184001, or you can just be a bit more digital and go with this QR code. Yeah, which one are you? Are you a true to selfer, super authentic in how you come across regardless of the environment? Or are you more of a chameleon, more of an adapter? And by the way, these terms are created by one of my favorite scholars, Herminia Ibarra, who came up with these two terms and has done a lot of research on this topic of authenticity. Okay. So that's so interesting. It's about an almost equal split, right? We have 70 people and just over half, so about 57% or so, are chameleons, and the rest are true to selfers, somewhere like that. 60% or so are chameleons, 57. And we have the rest true to selfers. That's really interesting. So I'm looking at the chat. So Netherlands, in my experience, low context on feedback, high context on behavioral feedback. Okay. As we as we disguise it. That's interesting. Oh, so Bai says kind of switching between the two or both. I wish I could hear from you, Bai, but I don't think you can unmute yourself. That's so interesting. Maybe if you don't mind writing, how do you switch between the two? I would be um true to selfer, which that is very interesting. So David says, I'm a true to selfer, which means I left some organizations. And that is absolutely, David, that is an amazing segue to my next question. Like, what are the upsides of being a chameleon? What are the true and through and through, and I can't pretend. Oh, it's so interesting. Okay, so what are the upsides of being a chameleon? Why would you want to be more of the chameleon? Maybe write in the chat. So write in the chat. So more observant of your environment and your needs if you're a chameleon. Yeah, these people are much more adaptable. You can kind of fake it, maybe. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, Martine says respect. That's so interesting. So I guess you're saying that chameleons get more respect. That's how I'm reading it. Individuals are keen to fit into the organizational structure, less conflicts. Yeah, so it's so interesting. Like, right, you're writing all of these and you're spot on, right? These are all the benefits of being a chameleon, and yet I feel like the business environment so much pushes, let's be our authentic selves. But we know that it's really helpful sometimes to be a chameleon. It works better internationally, absolutely. And I will tell a story about myself. I started out here very much. I lived in the Netherlands and I felt like I could be very much my true to selfer. I'm very direct, so that was great. And then I came here to IMD where I had to work a lot in Asia. And my first few big programs, my first few big clients, for whatever the reason, I think the universe wanted to send me some kind of a signal, were Japanese. And let's just say the very direct Dutch way of communicating, my true to selferness, did not go over well. And at least in one, not only did IMD lose that client, but I was fired in a very, very direct way, or in a very direct way with the Japanese. And so I had to learn that, yeah, if I do want to adapt across cultures and I want to connect, right? Leadership is about connecting, connect and then lead. If I wanted to connect, I couldn't always be that true to selfer, right? Okay, so Favre, I hope I'm, or no, Alina, I think your name is maybe Alina, but I'm not sure. You can differentiate between core principles to which you say true and some other things that you are happy to adapt and maybe yes and no. So I'm going to also, and then I'm going to ask the question about what are the benefits of being a true to selfer. So I did believe that as well. Like, okay, you can be a chameleon in your behavior, but your core values, they need to be the true to selfer. And one of my core values, and it has been since I was probably 15 or 16 years old, is efficiency. I love efficiency. I hate wasted time. I'm very direct in terms of my plan. I'm very goal oriented. And then I had children. And children are anything but people that value efficiency. Children are not efficient. Children, you ask them to get from point A to point B, and they will discover a butterfly and then be curious about this rock and want to sit down and have a snack. And so my very efficient self was struggling as a parent massively. And I had to step back and say, okay, this is one of my core values, efficiency. But the people who I am leading that I need to connect with, my children, don't need this from me. They need something else. So something in my core value does not resonate. It doesn't help me connect with my children. So I needed to re-examine one of my core values. And so I now have my space still at IMD that I can be very efficient, but I need to be a bit of a chameleon when I go home and say, you know what, the efficiency goes out the door. So I used to think that as well, and then I learned something as well. Okay, so what are the I totally agree, Ua. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, or maybe it's Ava. Maybe it's Ava. I can imagine it's Ava. Being sensitive to diversity, absolutely, right? Chameleons can be more sensitive to that diversity. Um, I don't know, you two, 6'8", you sound like a spy. Maybe you really are a switch. Maybe you're a spy. You're a switcher, okay. Um, doesn't being too chameleon and you this is why, so I'm allergic to these terms like we need leaders who are authentic. It is much more complicated than that, right? Because if we're truly chameleons, then are we all just assimilating, right? So we bring all these diverse people in and we're like, we want you to all be alike. it is not black and white. This topic, which is why we're doing this webinar on it today, is really, really complex. It is not a simple topic. There are things that maybe you have to adapt to, and then at some point, are you adapting so much that you just create, or is everyone adapting so much you create an organization of just of clones of one another, right? So, what is the true self? Falguni says true self, authenticity, and you don't need to remember what you have said or done. Honesty and transparency comes through. Oh, that's interesting. So you almost equate being a chameleon with maybe being dishonest. Okay. Absolutely, Shaheen, right? That's a challenge, right? If you're really authentic, how do you then connect with diverse people on your team? Um, Adapting to circumstances. I've heard that before, Edward. Like maybe your adaptability is your true self, and then you can be adaptable and authentic at the same time. I like that. I don't know if all of us can say that. That's brilliant. What other upsides are there of being a true to selfer? You require less energy, at least in the beginning, right? So we know that chameleons, they require a little bit more energy to read the environment around them. It takes more cognitive effort to say, okay, what do the people around me need? How do I adapt? Very, very true. Um, that's so interesting. I'm going to ask you, Yaha, to say what is your culture? You say adaptability is called hypocrisy. Um, and true to selfers at the outset, they don't require that same cognitive effort to be able to analyze the environment and adapt themselves. They're just kind of who they are. But the effort comes later on when they then realize, okay, maybe I'm not connecting with the people. Maybe I'm not able to adapt. Or as David said, I've had to leave organizations. That takes a lot of energy to leave one organization and come into a new one. Oh, that's so interesting. Thank you, Yaya. Yaya. I hope maybe you can put the phonetics if I'm misspelling your name. Okay, so there's the upsides and downsides of each of them. Again, I think we in the organizational behavior community and in the world in general, we look at authenticity too black and white. Like you're either authentic or you're not, and authenticity is good and anything else is bad. Um, True to selfer is generally great at building trust. I thought that too, Isabel, until I experienced myself in different cultures where my directness, which absolutely built trust in the Netherlands, even sometimes in Switzerland, did not build trust, but actually offended people in other cultures. So I've had to arm wrestle with my higher management as they wanted me to be untrue to my core values. It was exhausting. So for you, actually being a true to selfer was more tiring. So again, we see that this is quite complex. The other really weird thing that makes this all very hard to figure out is that chameleons, people that say there's a measure called self-monitoring. And so, as I said, one way that you can measure authenticity is by asking people, how authentic do you feel? I don't know if it's a great measure, but it is how we measure it. The other one, you can ask people, how authentic does Tracy seem, or how authentic does Isabel appear, right? And that's another way of measuring it. The weird thing is that people that report being chameleons are actually seen as more authentic. So people that are able to adapt to the environment are sometimes seen as more authentic, maybe because they look more empathic. This is the scale that is seen, and it's not every study, but when it has been found that there's higher, what are called the self-monitors, people that self-monitor their behavior, and higher levels of authenticity, this is the scale that is used. I would probably make a good actor. I've considered myself good. So a little bit of this, I almost want to call it charisma that goes along with being a chameleon. There's a correlation, by the way, between charisma and being more of an adaptable person in that environment. I am good at games like charades. Oh, I am good. I can make impromptu speeches. I can look anyone in the eye and tell a lie with a straight face. So there's almost this a little bit of like self or deception in this that comes across sometimes as inauthentic. So that even brings for me less validity to these studies that use that measure of others' perceptions of your authenticity. So are you perceived as authentic? Okay. And I want to really distinguish that there is this being perceived as authentic, and then there's the feeling of authenticity, which are two different things. Okay. Now, you might say at a business and a leadership environment, being perceived as authentic is more important because there's all these positive attributes that people attribute to people that are authentic. So what's more important is being perceived. But then if we're talking about turbulence, right? Inner turbulence, that inner turbulence is often caused from not feeling authentic. And that's true. That's true for both women and men. This is not something that is specific to women. Lloyd asks, why can't you adapt your style, respect different cultures, and remain authentic, acting consistent with your values? I hope, Lloyd, I'm going to answer that. But I guess I can just use an example, like adapting your style. Let's say that your authentic self is very direct, and it's not necessarily like in Asia, for example. I'll give my experience. Like it's a lot about reading the air, allowing people not to save face. That's not something I authentically value, the saving face. I'm like, you know what? I want the feedback and I want it direct. That's my authentic self. So for me, I don't feel like I can always be consistent on both. Now, for some of you, maybe adaptability is authentic for you, so it feels authentic. Okay, so, and as I said, this is true. This is a challenge for both women and for men. This is not unique. There's a great study, and this is a study that was done actually in the US with President Clinton. This is a 20-year-old study. And this has been replicated. The same finding has been replicated. But I like the President Clinton one because I think it really illustrates the point. So Laura Teeton, she's a professor at Stanford. She's still there. And she showed people at just after the Clinton or during the Clinton impeachment trials, right? President Clinton, president in the US, a former president, he was up for impeachment for perjury, for lying to Congress, lying to the Senate, sorry, to the Senate. And so there was a question of, should he a confidence vote? Should he remain president? And Laura Teeton showed videos of President Clinton showing two different sets of emotions, either being really angry, like, I don't know why I'm being accused of this. I'm being accused of things wrongly. This is crazy, like really being angry and aggressive, or him being remorseful. I'm so sorry for what I did. I betrayed my family. I betrayed the American people, okay? What emotions do you think people said of Clinton? What emotions or attributes did they attribute to him when he showed a lot of anger? What do you think it was? What did they say about him? Clinton is, and you fill in the blanks. Write it in the chat. Clinton, Valentina, authentic. Okay, guilty. Interesting. Is chameleon. Clinton is humane. He's guilty. So when he showed anger, but Nina said Clinton is strong. Arrogant, interesting. Okay, masculine. David says masculine, interesting one. Good. And what emotion or what attributes do you think that they said of Clinton when he showed remorse? When he showed sadness, I'm sorry. When he said I'm sorry, what emotions? He's more human. He's ingenious. He's weak. Weak. David. Yeah. So when he was angry, they said, oh, he shows power. He's confident. He's assertive. And when he showed sorrow, when he said, I'm sorry, they said he's weak. He has a lack of control and he's defeated. And she also asked the participants something that was really interesting. Should Clinton be impeached? Yes, no. Which of the two, because they only saw one video, either the anger or the remorse, which Clinton do you think they said should be impeached? The anger Clinton or the remorse Clinton? The remorse, yep. When Clinton showed sadness, that was when people said he should be taken out of office. When he showed anger, much less likely, significantly less likely, right? There was another more recent study where Fisher and her colleagues showed videos of a leader who was crying. It was an emotional situation and they were crying. It was a male leader and they were crying. And they said, what do you think about this leader? And people said things like, this leader lacks control. This leader is too vulnerable. This leader isn't strong enough, etc. Valentine, we're going to get into that question when Clinton was a woman, because remember his wife ran for office. His wife. So interestingly, like in terms of authentic self, there tends to be, and this is a very recent study, there tends to be a bias against men showing kind of feminine emotions, softer emotions, saying I'm sorry, or I'm showing remorse, or I'm self-reflecting, right? Now, there was another recent study. It wasn't done with a female president, but it was done with a female leader. So they had an actress dressed the same way in two videos, showing a lot of anger, getting angry for a situation. And they said that leader, she's out of control. She's incompetent. She's unprepared. These were some of the angry female leader dressed in a suit, you know, not okay to show anger, incompetent. Whereas when that leader for the same outcome showed remorse, and she didn't cry, by the way, just showing sadness, sensitive, caring, and nurturing. Yeah. And that's a very good question. I think Obama showed weakness as well and was well taken, but it was Obama. Yeah, it's so interesting to say. Like, why I would tend to, I don't know if I would say weakness, but definitely compassion. Esther, it's a very good question. I'm not sure how I feel about that. But when she was showing sadness, oh, she's sensitive, she's caring, and she's nurturing. And these studies get to this topic that we call in psychology emotional labor, which is this idea of no. And Valentina, she didn't cry. I just couldn't find an icon that was good of sadness. And I should have just said meh, without a tear. She did not cry. No, she didn't cry. Um, and this is an idea called emotional labor. So it's essentially this notion that in work, in labor, we also have to have an emotional level of labor, which is that control of emotions. We might feel something. And, one of my favorite examples, I've never been a flight attendant, but like many times, like a flight attendant, right? There might be a passenger that really makes you angry. They've hit their button for the fifth time, or they will not put on their seatbelt, and you really are angry at them. But you can't be angry. What do you have to do? You have to show up and you have to smile and be courteous. So it's like you're angry, you're really frustrated, but you can't show that. That's emotional labor, right? And for men, that emotional labor looks something different traditionally than for women. So if we think about negative and positive emotions, emotional labor more often for men means when you're feeling happy, like when you're feeling positive emotions, compassion, empathy, sometimes you actually have to hide that and just seem aggressive and like you really know what you're doing and in power, or even maybe fear you feel, but you have to show that you're powerful. Whereas for women, the display rules are more likely that when you have anger or sad, like negative emotions that are aggressive negative emotions, you need to um, kind of push those down and instead show a happy face. Yeah. So men and women traditionally both have display rules, but they look different. Okay. And why is this a problem? Why do we care that we have certain expectations for appropriate emotions for women and appropriate emotions for men in the workplace? Why is this a problem? And just write in the chat, what do you think? Okay, so there's a fairness element to it, right? An equity element, bias, right? And both sides, right? We see bias, misunderstanding. Yeah, Sally, right? We might misunderstand what emotions our female and male leaders are feeling. It is suppressing emotions, as Maria said, and that takes a lot of effort. And one of my favorite books, one of my favorite books of all time, it is by Gabor Mata, and it's called When the Body Says No. And he talks about how, when we're unwilling to be vocal about how we're feeling or to make decisions for ourselves, the body will make it for us. And he talks about how there's an emotional component to autoimmune disease, to cancer, etc. Yeah, you're right, Edward. This is getting better, luckily, but it's still not great, right? I'm gonna assume most of you have had to feel that emotional labor in your life, still today. Um, okay, so why is the problem? It takes a lot of cognitive resources to manage how we come across externally. So imagine like all of those cognitive resources could be used elsewhere, right? How much energy are we taking in trying to manage this inner turbulence that we feel? Okay. The emotional strain is present for both men and women. Okay, so when surveys have been done, as well as experiments where you ask people to suppress negative emotion and show positive, both men and women feel bad when they have to do that. It's not positive for either of them, and they feel more stressed. So you see, like cortisol levels rise. And interestingly, though, the negative feelings don't exist so much the other way around. So when you have to suppress positive emotions and show negative ones, the kind of aggressive ones, people don't report the same feelings, nor do you see the same stress hormones being produced. Okay. And we know that women have to do this more often than men, suppress the negative and show the positive, which is why this is one reason why this is um, negative. And I think Luis wrote that in the chat, right? Women are expected to be more pleasant. Women have to suppress the negative and show the positive in general more often than men do. Now I'm making maybe blanket statements. If you've seen it differently, um, write it in the chat. And interestingly, women who get to show, this was a really interesting study, women who get to show in their work, male display rules, meaning, okay, I'm not going to show my positive, but I'm going to show my really aggressive negative emotions, reported feeling really powerful. So it was actually a positive thing for them to sometimes suppress those negative, suppress those positive and show that negative. So for them, for women that got to do that, they didn't report negative feelings, but they actually reported feeling more powerful. Um, so what are some of the considerations here that we have for leaders? First, I mean, we talk about authenticity, but chameleons have a lot of social benefits. In the research with Haminia Abara, um, she finds that chameleons are more likely in general to rise the organizational hierarchy. They tend to fit in better or feel like they fit in better as well. And sometimes chameleons are even seen as more authentic, and maybe that's the reason why. And being that chameleon does require more energy. We know that, right? It requires more mental and emotional energy. Women and men both are asked to alter their authentic selves in the workplace. This is not a female issue, but women are more often asked to suppress the negative emotions, which seems to have a more negative effect on the body and the mind. Sure, Isabel. And it's not much I can elaborate, but I'll tell you in a second. Finding a way to acknowledge those negative emotions, but in a socially acceptable way, right? Can I still express my negative emotions without having to suppress them, but in a way that will be acceptable? Because we know that women showing anger, and I just showed you a few studies, is often not accepted. Isabel, it was very simple. It was a question, how powerful do you feel? And they reported feeling, it was a scale, I think 1 to 5, 1 to 7. They reported feeling more powerful in these situations. Yeah. Sally asked this question, is there a link on either of these? I don't know, Sally. What do you think? What is your, I'm guessing you're asking for a reason. So what is your hypothesis on this one? So we need to find a way. If we want to get rid of those, of course we can change stereotypes and biases, but that is a societal issue. We don't have control over that really at an individual level. We do have control over the emotions that we express. So in a socially acceptable way, how do we do that? Still express those negative emotions instead of the positive ones when we really genuinely feel them, when that is our authentic self. How do we do that? Because that, I think, is the question for us as leaders in order to have less of this inner turbulence and more well-being. So maybe write that in the chat. Maybe you've had to learn how to do that. Melanie. So Melanie says, why not transform negative emotion into constructive energy? So somehow like an alchemist, right? Take that negative emotion and use it for energy. Okay, I'm not sure if everyone is able to do that. Maybe if you worked on mindfulness or meditation, maybe you can do that. So, yeah. You would say, I guess that extroverted women would have to make more effort to suppress the negative emotions, maybe. Or maybe they would just naturally want to express them more, so that suppression takes more. Take a break, step back. But Shaheen, even when you take a break, right, those negative emotions are still there sometimes, right? What do you do with them during that break? What do you do with them during that break? Time, breathe, don't react. So it sounds like all of you have had to do this. Talk calmly. Okay, I would guess that. Yeah. Okay. What other ideas do we have? Because this is the challenge. How do we do that? The feedback loop. Ah, if you can elaborate that, I'm not sure exactly what you mean on that, Sally. Meditation helps. So Rajaswari, I do meditate every morning. And that for me, I acknowledge the emotions. I say, okay, where am I? Some days I wake up and I can feel the anger, Where sometimes I wake up and I can feel the frustration. It's like, okay, I acknowledge it. I wish it well, and I let it go sometimes. And even when I do that, it's still sometimes there. So maybe I'm not a great meditator, but that can help. Relabel negative emotions as uncomfortable emotions. Yes, and sometimes the negative ones are still there. But yeah, it's a great one. Negative them as, okay, it's uncomfortable. It's not negative. Had a smile. You jerk. I like that one. I don't know how authentic you would come across. Okay. Count to 10. So we see someone's, right? Take a distance. So a lot of the suggestions you're giving are about relabeling or stepping back, right? And we know that we're not always in a position to actually step back at that moment. Sometimes things have to be dealt with in real time. The only thing, thank you. Let me see. The only things I can suggest, and I wanted to share this, but somehow it's a hidden slide. So I'm going to unhide it. There we go. So how to avoid this emotional labor of the female display rules. One that can, oops, let me share with you. Share. Here we go. Sorry about that. Okay, here we go. Is to verbally express the emotion, but not physically show it. What I mean, and this I've seen many leaders do, but also female leaders do it really well, of saying, this makes me, right now, I'm feeling angry about this. Now, you don't show anger. You don't raise your voice. You don't show aggression, but you verbally label it. And that is a way you still are coming across very soft. You're using a softer voice. You're not being aggressive in your body posturing in a way that might threaten the other person, but you acknowledge it. So the person hears it and you hear yourself say it. This can sometimes help. Now, if you're a flight attendant, I don't know if you can say to a customer, I'm feeling angry at the moment. So I don't know if it works for everybody, but it could work in a team meeting or in a one-on-one. Yeah, right now I'm feeling quite angry. Or when I hear that, yeah, I get angry and I hear you. I want to understand more, right? Absolutely. Ting says it. No, name the emotion. I think that can be really helpful. Whoop, it keeps disappearing. What's going on? Okay. And then the other one is, you mentioned this, right? Find healthy outlets to display the negative emotion. And that can be, meditation. That can be if you do kickboxing, or I don't know, you go to a boxing gym and punch it out, go for a run. So find other ways. But for some people, that negative emotion still sticks there somewhere in the body. And so you better make sure that you're really, according to Gabor Mata, that you're really working out that negative emotion in order not to have the later on internal effects. I present these two options to you in a way that actually seems a bit disappointing to me. So I'm going to name my emotion. I'm going to say it's disappointing, right? Because there's these two and there's not many. And we know all the negative effects of women and men who try to suppress the negative emotion. This is a bigger systematic issue. It is about learning to accept men who cry or men who show remorse, and learning to accept women who show more masculine emotions like anger. So this is about creating a different environment, a different context. And so I hope all of you are here because you want to work on that. And immediately, as of this afternoon or tomorrow, there are things that we might have to do individually because that environment around us hasn't changed. I cannot emphasize enough that this inauthenticity at the emotional level, especially going from negative to positive, does take a toll on us. So something that I present this to you as a professor. I feel a little bit dissatisfied in the solutions I can give, and I think it helps to talk about it as well. Maria asks, can you express emotions with superiors? I'm guessing you mean negative emotions, but I mean, I think superiors are happy if you smile or I guess it depends on the psychological safety. I have been in situations where I absolutely can't, and when I've tried to, it has a huge negative implication for me in my career, even if I do it in a very, well, what I think is a very non-aggressive way. And then there are other people I've worked for that are absolutely fine with me saying, oh, that disappoints me, or I'm angry about that. So I think it depends on the psychological safety you have. Rajaswari says, if negative emotions and feelings are chronic for a while, it could be good to find out the causes of those negative feelings. Yes, I think that's a very good one. If you have chronic anger, this could even be something as much as like an intergenerational or a generational family issue that has been that you absorbed from energy in your environment. Absolutely. So I think that's a very good point as well. Um, if we could talk to chameleons and ask them why they are changing colors, they would say to survive. So I guess it is a personal choice of how much they want to please a particular crowd. And I think it's also about survival, short term, and long term, as David, I think, said, right? He has to change a lot of organizations. So you would say in that organization, he hasn't survived, he's chosen to leave, but maybe long term, he has better health than those of us who are chameleons. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Um, I actually said, oh, I like that, finding allies in your leadership team. I said originally that I wouldn't have time for questions, but I actually do have some time. So if we have one or two questions you have for me, please write in the chat. I will try to answer them. And if not, ending 15 minutes early, I guess will be not so bad for some of you. Thank you for your interest and your courage to drive change. These are things that are ingrained in us, multi-generational, societal, really hard to change, and absolutely important for us to slowly make a difference on individually, but as a system as well, if we want to have a healthier society. So thank you. How to change the conversation. So Falguni, the only thing I would say is role model it. I encourage my son to show sadness. I encourage my son to show vulnerability. And I encourage my daughter to show anger and to show, assertiveness. So I think we can change it generation at a time as leaders, encouraging our next gens to show non-gender specific emotions or non-gender expected emotions. Yeah. What is your experience and advice? Okay, so what is my experience, Celine? Chameleons, if you want to rise to the top, is being very valuable. I'm not sure how much emotional labor it's going to take for you, and this is an individual question to get to that point. So if you get to the C-suite because you've been a great chameleon, but if you're so emotionally exhausted and maybe even have chronic illness by the time you get there, it's not going to be super helpful. So I think that's chameleons, it helps. I don't know if we believe in Gabor Mate's work, I think for some of us it takes a real toll. Yeah. Are there any articles you can suggest? Yes. I told you one book. I love the book When the Body Says No. And then the article called The Authenticity Paradox by Hamini Arbara is outstanding. She talks about all her research looking at chameleons versus true to selfers. She actually did her dissertation on this topic. She's brilliant. Okay, Jennifer, I'm just getting a little bit, my authentic self is getting a bit warm. What do you recommend to switch the dynamics of a senior leadership team to being more authentic? Again, I don't necessarily think that authentic is better, right? If you have a member of the leadership team that really struggles, let's say with chronic anger, I don't necessarily know if I want, and I've seen that before, right? You have a member that has these huge outbursts. I don't know if I want them to be their authentic self there. I would rather them be adaptive at that moment, if it is so destructive to the team. And this is not talking about women. This is talking sometimes about men. So how would for me, my philosophy, that's my personal philosophy. What is more important is that you create an environment where people feel like they can be what they want, either their authentic self or the chameleon, without necessarily feeling like one is better than the other, that you need to be a chameleon or need to be a true to self. Here you do what feels right for you. At the same time, I do have some value labels on authenticity, which might be abusive, right? If someone's authentic self at that moment is abusive or too aggressive, I'm not sure if I want that. Now, my bigger question there is, why is that person so aggressive? Why does that person have so much anger? I don't know. Even if they've had that pattern for 25, 30 years, I'm not sure if that is their authentic self. It has come from somewhere. And I think many leaders who are curious and want to change can change those patterns to get back to maybe that more calm and more compassionate, authentic self. So that's my views. Thank you, Martine. Me to confirm once more that life is not black and white. Yes, it is What I love, and if you were in my class, you would learn this. I am allergic to buzzwords. We should be authentic. We should be more vulnerable. Vulnerability works for some, it doesn't work so well for others. We need to be ambidextrous. We need to go between, there's a shadow and a light to each of these. And I find leadership very gray, which is why I love it. It's not black and white. Thank you very much, everybody. I hope you all left with some interesting information, but also some reflections on what you need to do to have a less turbulent inner self and also a more effective and benevolent leadership environment around you. Thanks so much, everybody. Bye.